How's it going, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Now, you may or may not have heard about ChatGPT or any sort of AI platform. And if you have heard of it, you know that it is all the rage right now, and it is rather controversial when it comes to education. Now, if you haven't heard of ChatGPT, it is essentially a generative artificial intelligence platform, and it's one of actually hundreds. But this one was actually created by Microsoft, and it is sort of a conversational language tool. So you can create a free account for now, and you can log in and you can ask it questions, you can ask it for more information, you can ask it just about anything and it will reply to you. And you can create sort of a conversation where you can continue to become more specific or provide feedback to really tailor the response that you're looking for. So let me give you some examples of why it's controversial and what it can do within the context of higher education. With the problem though, a lot of institutions are seeing this as a threat to student learning. Because what you can do is you can have ChatGPT essentially do your assignments for you. In a sense, it can write papers and it can give you a lot of information that you can just kind of plug in, and so you're bypassing the actual thought process. It can also give you feedback where I personally think you could get in a habit of sidestepping the critical thinking process. So that's where a lot of faculty and a lot of administrators see this as a threat, and they want to create policies to prevent this and see this as an academic integrity issue and want to find ways to prevent its use within the classroom. Now, on the other hand, there are actually some faculty and instructors and administrators who feel like this is a solid resource. And I tend to side with this group, and I'm going to tell you why. Because when I've played around with ChatGPT, it isn't quite what you think it is or what people say it is. It's not quite there yet. It is an incredible resource and it will give you a lot of information, but it doesn't quite do it on the level to where it could technically replace your own work. So let me give you some examples. For starters, I think it is a solid foundation because it's not specific. The other day I was playing around with it and I asked it, can you create some text messages for me because I want to break dinner plans? So what would they look like? And it gave me about 8 examples. None of them I would use because none of them sounded like my voice or sounded like my personality. However, there were some phrases within those examples that I thought were well worded and something I would use, and it helped me to sort of articulate the thought that I wanted or the point that I wanted to get across. So it was helpful in that regard because it was sort of a scaffold and said, here, consider these things. And so that's one way that I see that it is valuable. Now, when we dive into from a student perspective, what can it do? Well, it can create study guides. So what I wanted to do is I took a topic that I know nothing about, which is drug receptor binding, and I said, can you create a study guide that outlines this topic? And it did. It created some general bulleted outlines. I think it could go a lot more in depth, and I absolutely could have asked it that to say, can you go in more in depth with these specific topics? And then I also asked it to create practice exam questions, and it did. Now, again, these were also pretty general, and I think in order to get to something more more substantial, then you would have to be very specific with the questions that you're asking. And I think that's sort of this dance with artificial intelligence is if you ask it a question with an implication of a deeper meaning, it may not pick up on that yet. So within the study guide, I also said, can you explain this specific thing to me? Can you break that down? In which it did, but it was still a scientific topic that I knew nothing about. So I said, can you explain this to me like I'm 10 years old? And it did. It created an analogy and it talked about Legos and how cells are kind of Legos or drugs are Legos that need to be broken apart in order to build something. And I thought that was really great because then it put it in a way from a perspective that I could understand. And so from what I've seen is you can also ask it to explain it to you like you're 6 years old or you're 3 years old. So if there are very complex topics, you can continue to throw it back at ChatGPT of, can you reword this for me in a way that I can understand? Now, there are many other videos on YouTube that really go into the depths of ChatGPT and what it can do. So I encourage you to kind of look around with those to see if there are things that you can use to your advantage. But right now I'm going to continue to stick with the student perspective and also an institutional perspective. So the other thing that you can do from a student perspective is it feels like kind of like a tailored search engine, because you can be very specific and it will kind of sift through all of that and bring it back to you. So I used an example where I said, can you find an example or find some research studies that talk about office hours and then pharmacy students? And so it came back with 4 solid examples of what I was looking for. And I thought, this is great. I need to go find these studies then, see what they're about. And so when I went over to the academic search engines, and I also used Google Scholar, I couldn't find them. And then so I went back and I was looking at the titles and I was looking at the authors and the year and the journals and also the description. And then I started to realize these aren't real. And so I put it back on ChatGPT and said, these are not real studies. To which the reply was essentially, you're right, I'm sorry, it's not really my role to do that, or I'm not really capable of doing that. So you should consider searching these academic databases to find what you are looking for. So when we think about plagiarism and academic integrity, it's kind of hard, because if I'm looking for studies, it's making things up, and it has been known to make things up. So you really have to understand what you want to get out of your questions, and you have to learn how to identify when ChatGPT is not being accurate or not being truthful. And what I have picked up, and I haven't spent a lot of time with it, but what I've started to see as a pattern is when it describes things that aren't really based on anything, essentially if it's making it up, it will rephrase. So I think one of the studies was faculty office hours and the satisfaction of pharmacy students. That was the title of the study. And then when it described the study, it said, this study looks at faculty office hours and how satisfied students were with using it. So not quite the abstract I was looking for, but then when I realized you just kind of took those words and rephrased them, that's not legit. So it's very helpful in that way. But what you can also do, since we're on the topic of research studies, is you could take some of that text from a study, paste it into ChatGPT, and ask it to summarize it for you. And it will. So you can take complex theories, you can take complex studies and say, can you break this down and summarize this for me? You can also say, can you create 10 takeaways for me? There was a book for an activity that I was doing with students where I asked it to summarize some chapters and create discussion questions. Now, the discussion questions were mixed. Some are pretty surface level and some are actually pretty thought-provoking. But again, I think it was a good starting point. So from an institutional perspective, I think you could use this as well for research. What I also tried to ask it to do is, can you create some programs for me? Can you create a peer mentor program for me that focuses on student success at first-year college students? And it did. Now, granted, it was very general, but it was also sort of like that foundational understanding of what a peer mentor program is. And I think that could be a springboard into, I don't think I want to use that particular responsibility of the peer mentor, but I may want to use this one, so I need to look into it. So then I continued to ask it, what schools utilize peer mentor programs like this? And it began to list some schools. However, it listed a school that I'm very familiar with, and it described its peer mentor program as their e-advisor program, which has nothing to do with peer mentoring. So again, that's where it comes back to these flaws of ChatGPT is not entirely accurate, and you need to be very specific, but you also need to be very cautious in the information that's coming back. So I would recommend or strongly encourage anything you do with something like that, when the information comes back, look elsewhere to verify that information. Now, when I ask it for recipes, that's different, because what's coming back seems to make sense with some of the basic recipes that I have asked for. But when I'm asking for research and peer mentor programs, it's not really getting me what I need. And what was interesting is that I also was trying to ask for existing studies that were centered around a certain theory for a framework, and it threw back potential titles of studies based on that framework. So I thought that was interesting, because I thought, okay, this could give me some ideas for future use if I ever want to go down that road. And again, this is where we toe the line with plagiarism. But here's the kicker. This is where it's beneficial. And this is where my biggest takeaway from ChatGPT is this is a foundation. This is not a replacement. This is a supplement to everything you do when you search for information. I think it gives you a great starting point. For example, the text messages. I wouldn't use any of those, but it got me thinking of, okay, this is how I can use my words. When I was looking at the research studies, they were fake. They were not accurate, but it started to give me a sort of an initial brainstorm that I could start to think, okay, what can I use from this? Another experiment is I put a job description in there and I said, can you create potential interview questions based on these responsibilities? Now, what it did is it sort of, again, it rephrased the responsibilities as questions and it threw them back at me. But some of them were worded in ways that I thought were pretty unique and I thought were very quality interview questions. So it's sort of like with the information you get back, you have to sift through and pick out what you find to be valuable and how you can use it. So it's not 100% accurate. It's not going to meet everything you're looking for, but it can give you a lot of great information to start and then hand it over to you to sift through. So that's where I see it as an asset. It's sort of like a library catalog where it just brings the information to you and then you can do the rest. I don't see yet how I could take the information it gave me and then apply it with my own name and essentially plagiarize, because it's not there. And I've heard faculty talk about this, and you can start to see it as you get used to the patterns of the language, is if I were to ask it to write a paper for me and then submit it, it's kind of easy to tell that a human didn't write it and that there was not much thought put into it. Now, you can do a lot of things. You can ask it to write you something in the voice of a famous actor, and it will do that. But I think that's more of a novelty thing right now. So if you're looking at academic integrity, you're naive if you're a student trying to do that. And again, when we talk about the issue of cheating, a lot of faculty will tell you if students really want to cheat, they're going to find a way. So this isn't really something that's going to revolutionize cheating. It's just another thing that students will probably use. And I also had heard someone else talk about this, where our reaction right now to AI and ChatGPT in particular is, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? This is going to completely change our way of life. But this person said, we felt the same way about Wikipedia. And if you remember, either you were an instructor, you were a student, when that came about was, hey, I can go look up a topic and find all of these resources, and then I can start to cite all of this stuff. And then it turned into don't cite Wikipedia. And things have kind of settled, and now we use that as a springboard into other things. So I will look at the resources linked on a Wikipedia page and then search out from there. And so I think that's a very close parallel to what you can do with ChatGPT. So if you have not checked this out, go create an account, go play around with it, do any sort of topic, do whatever you can. It will link to YouTube videos for you. The only drawback with that is it has information up to 2021. So anything more current, it does not have. However, there are extensions that can link to current events, and I haven't played around with that yet. So if you are looking for stuff that's independent of time, such as knowledge or concepts, or can you explain this algebra formula to me, it can definitely do that. So I want to know your experience. What do you do? What do you use it for? Have you seen any drawbacks? Is there something really cool that we don't know about that you discovered? Let me know in the comments, please. I really want to know. I think this is a rabbit hole I continue to fall down, and there are many other AI platforms that can really be utilized from a student and an institutional perspective. And I think this is just the tip of the iceberg of some really cool things. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope this gave you a kind of a primer from an educational context. And if you want to see more information like this and content, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Don't forget to hit like, and I will catch you in the next one.